I'll never forget the look on Vincent's face when the waiter approached his table with my handwritten note. Pure, unadulterated terror washed over him like a midnight storm hitting a calm shore. His emerald green eyes, the same ones that had whispered sweet lies to me that very morning, widened to the size of dinner plates. His confident smile, the one he'd been flashing at the stunning brunette across from him, crumbled into something resembling a deer caught in headlights. If there were Academy Awards given for best performance by a cheating husband caught absolutely red-handed, Vincent Hartwell would have swept every single category that evening at Bellacorte, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Millbrook. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. But let me tell you something. The real performance, the truly Oscar-worthy act, wasn't Vincent's pathetic display of panic. It was mine. Sitting there in the shadows of that dimly lit restaurant, watching my husband of 12 years wine and dine another woman with money from our joint account, I had transformed from devastated wife to master, orchestrator of justice in the span of exactly 47 minutes. That's how long it took me to go from the woman who had kissed him goodbye at 7 a.m., wishing him luck on his emergency business dinner, to the woman who was about to serve him the most expensive meal of his life, a helping of truth with a side of consequences he'd never forget. The note was simple, elegant even, written on cream-colored stationery that I'd stolen from the restaurant's host stand while pretending to powder my nose. Just 14 words that would shatter the elaborate house of cards Vincent had been building for God knows how long. 14 words that would expose every lie, every excuse, every late night at the office for exactly what they were. The waiter, bless his heart, had understood immediately when I slipped him that folded piece of paper along with a crisp $100 bill. For the gentleman in the navy blazer at table 12, I'd whispered. And please, I'd love to see his reaction. What happened next was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction unfold in slow motion. Vincent's manicured fingers, the same hands that had traced my face that morning while promising me he'd be home by 9, trembled as he unfolded the paper. I watched from my strategic position behind the marble pillar as confusion morphed into recognition, recognition into horror, and horror into something that looked remarkably like a man realizing his entire world was about to collapse around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. His companion. And oh, wasn't she a vision in her scarlet red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent? Leaned forward with concern written across her perfectly sculpted features. She was exactly the type Vincent had always claimed he found too high maintenance when we'd people-watch together during happier times. Blonde hair cascading in Hollywood waves, lips painted the color of fresh blood, diamonds sparkling at her throat that caught the candlelight like fallen stars. Everything I wasn't, everything he'd apparently decided he wanted instead of the woman who had stood by him through law school, supported his dream of opening his own practice, and believed every single lie that had fallen from his silver tongue. The water glass slipped from Vincent's grasp as if his nervous system had simply forgotten how to function. Crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through my soul, each shard reflecting the fractured pieces of what I had once believed was an unbreakable marriage. Other diners turned to look, some with mild curiosity, others with the kind of voyeuristic interest that people have when they sense drama unfolding in real time. But Vincent wasn't looking at the broken glass. He wasn't looking at his dinner companion's increasingly concerned expression. He wasn't even looking at the note that had caused this spectacular meltdown. No, his eyes were frantically scanning the restaurant like a trapped animal searching for an escape route, because somewhere in his cheating heart, he knew exactly who had sent that message. He knew I was there, watching, waiting, orchestrating this moment with the precision of a master chess player moving her pieces into position for checkmate. That's when I decided to give him what he was looking for. I stood up from my table, emerging, from behind the pillar like a ghost materializing from the shadows, and our eyes met across that crowded restaurant. In that electric moment of recognition, I saw 12 years of marriage flash through his expression. Our wedding day, our first apartment, the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, the life we'd built together that he had apparently decided wasn't enough. But I also saw something else in those familiar green eyes. The dawning realization that the woman he'd underestimated, the wife he'd taken for granted, the partner he'd betrayed so callously was not going to go quietly into the night. I was not going to disappear with a whimper and a settlement agreement. I was not going to make this easy for him. I raised my wine glass, a beautiful Bordeaux that I'd ordered specifically for this moment, in a mock toast. The gesture was subtle enough that other diners might have mistaken it for a friendly acknowledgement, but Vincent knew better. He understood exactly what that raised glass meant. Game over, darling. Checkmate. Your move. And then, with the kind of grace that comes from righteous fury and 12 years of practicing law alongside him, I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer marking the end of his comfortable existence. I didn't run. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't give him or his mistress the satisfaction of seeing me break down, because this wasn't the end of my story. This was just the beginning of his reckoning. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you. So if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Let me back up and properly introduce myself. I'm Sophia Hartwell, and until exactly 4 hours before that moment at Bellacorte, I was just a devoted wife who believed her 12-year marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared dreams, and unshakable trust. I was the woman who still got butterflies when Vincent walked through our front door after a long day at his law firm. The same woman who had spent the last decade and a half believing that we were partners in every sense of the word, in business, in life, in love. I was a successful family therapist with my own practice in the heart of Millbrook's medical district, helping couples navigate their relationship challenges while ironically remaining completely blind to the cracks forming in my own marriage. How's that for professional irony? Every day, I sat across from husbands and wives who couldn't communicate, who had grown apart, who struggled with trust issues, and I guided them back to each other with the confidence of someone who believed she had it all figured out. Meanwhile, my own husband was living a double life right under my expertly trained nose. Vincent and I had met during our final year at Westfield University. He was the charismatic law student who could charm professors and classmates alike with his quick wit and those devastating green eyes. I was completing my master's in psychology, drawn to his intelligence and what I foolishly believed was his integrity. Our courtship was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions, philosophical debates over coffee, and dreams of changing the world together. He was going to be a defense attorney fighting for justice, and I was going to heal families. We were going to be a power couple, making Millbrook a better place. One case, one family at a time. And for a while, it seemed like we were living that dream. Vincent established Hartwell and Associates 5 years after graduation, specializing in corporate law, rather than the criminal defense he'd originally planned. But success was success. The money was better, he'd reasoned, and we could do more good in the world if we were financially secure first. I opened my practice 3 years later, focusing on marriage and family counseling. We bought the beautiful colonial house on Elmwood, drive with the white picket fence and the garden where I spent Saturday mornings tending to roses that Vincent would surprise me with throughout the week, cutting fresh bouquets for my office. We were the couple other people envied. The Hartwells who hosted dinner parties where Vincent's lawyer colleagues would mingle with my therapist friends, creating a perfect blend of intellect and warmth. We were the couple who took annual trips to Tuscany, who could finish each other's sentences, who had inside jokes that made us laugh until our sides hurt. At least, that's what I thought we were. I was the wife who never questioned why Vincent started working later and later. In my profession, I understood the demands of building a successful practice. I was supportive when he began traveling more frequently for client development, even when it meant eating dinner alone 3 nights a week. I was understanding when he became distant, attributing it to stress and the pressure of growing his firm. After all, I was busy too, with my own clients depending on me to help them navigate their relationships while mine was apparently crumbling without my notice. Vincent was the husband who still brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who remembered to call my mother on her birthday, who would leave little notes in my briefcase telling me how proud he was of my work. He was the man who held me when I cried after particularly difficult sessions with clients, who listened to me vent about the heartbreak I witnessed daily in my office. He was my best friend, my confidant, my safe harbor in a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. Or, so I believed. Looking back now, I can see the signs that my professional training should have caught. The new cologne that appeared on his dresser. A sophisticated, expensive scent that replaced the familiar woody fragrance I'd been buying him for birthdays and Christmas for years. The way he started keeping his phone face down during dinner, when he used to share funny memes and work stories throughout our meals. The sudden interest in upgrading his wardrobe, trading his comfortable, well-worn suits for designer pieces that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. But I explained it all away with the same patience and understanding I showed my clients. Men sometimes needed to reinvent themselves as they approached their 40s. Success brought new pressures and new opportunities to expand one's horizons. A thriving law practice meant cultivating a more polished image. These weren't red flags. They were natural evolution. At least that's what I told myself. I was the woman who trusted so completely that when Vincent told me he had an emergency client dinner that Tuesday evening, something about a potential merger that required immediate attention, I didn't just believe him. I admired his dedication. I was proud that my husband was the kind of lawyer clients could count on, even if it meant sacrificing our planned quiet evening at home. I had even helped him choose his outfit that morning, straightening his navy blazer and telling him how handsome he looked, how lucky his clients were to have such a dedicated advocate. I kissed him goodbye at exactly 7:03 a.m., reminding him to eat something substantial since he'd probably be stuck in meetings all day and might not have time for lunch. That was the woman I was 4 hours ago, trusting, supportive, completely, and utterly clueless about the elaborate deception that had been unfolding around me for months, maybe years. That woman believed in forever. That woman believed in the sanctity of marriage vows. That woman believed that love and trust were enough to build a life on. But that woman was about to die a very sudden, very brutal death. The call that shattered. My world came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of my session with the Parkers, a couple struggling with infidelity issues. The irony wasn't lost on me later, but in that moment, I was completely focused on helping Margaret Parker work through her feelings of betrayal, while her husband sat across from my office couch, fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding eye contact. My phone, which I always kept on silent during sessions, lit up with a text from my college roommate and longtime friend, Rachel Morrison. Rachel lived in Boston now, working as a marketing executive for a tech company, but she was in town for a conference and had planned to surprise Vincent and me with dinner later that week. What she saw instead would change everything. The session, with the Parkers, wrapped up at 3:15, and as soon as they left my office, I checked my phone. Rachel's message was brief, but devastating. Sophia, I'm at Bellacorte for a business lunch. I just saw Vincent here with a woman. They're not talking business. I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should tell you, but I couldn't not tell you. Call me. My hands started trembling before my brain could fully process what I was reading. Vincent was supposed to be at his office, preparing for tonight's emergency client dinner. Bellacorte was on the opposite side of town from his law firm, in the arts district where expensive restaurants catered to people celebrating special occasions or conducting very personal business. It wasn't the kind of place you took clients, unless you were trying to impress them in ways that had nothing to do with legal expertise. I stared at those words on my screen until they blurred together. With a woman. Not talking business. The clinical part of my brain, the part trained to help people process trauma and betrayal, tried to kick in with rational explanations. Maybe it was a colleague. Maybe it was a client who preferred meeting in neutral upscale locations. Maybe Rachel was mistaken about the nature of their interaction. But my heart knew better. My heart was already cataloging all those little changes I'd noticed and dismissed. The new cologne, the updated wardrobe, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously after years of claiming he was too busy, the sudden interest in trying new restaurants around the city, as if he was scouting locations for something. The way he'd been taking phone calls in his car lately, claiming the reception was better outside. I called Rachel immediately, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "Are you absolutely certain it was Vincent?" "Honey, I've known your husband for 15 years. It was definitely him." Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. And Sophia, the way they were sitting, the way he was looking at her. This wasn't a business meeting. He was holding her hand across the table. They were sharing dessert. She was wearing this gorgeous emerald necklace that caught the light every time she moved, and he kept reaching over to touch it, to touch her. An emerald necklace. My birthstone. Vincent knew emeralds were my favorite gemstone because my birthday was in May, and he'd given me emerald earrings for our 5th anniversary. The thought that he was now admiring emeralds on another woman's neck felt like a physical blow to my chest. "What did she look like?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Tall, blonde, probably early 30s, stunning, in an intimidating sort of way. Designer everything. Her dress looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. She had this confidence about her, like she was used to being the most beautiful woman in any room she entered. The opposite of me in almost every way. I was brunette, average height, and while I took care of myself, I'd never been the type to turn heads when I walked into a room. I was approachable, warm, the kind of woman people felt comfortable confiding in. Apparently, Vincent had decided he wanted something different. Someone who looked like she belonged in magazines rather than sitting across from crying couples in a therapist's office. "How long have they been there?" I managed to ask. "I got here about 30 minutes ago, and they were already well into their meal. From the look of things, they've been here for a while." "Sophia, I hate being the one to tell you this, but they look comfortable together. Like this isn't their first time." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a single lapse in judgment that might be explained away or forgiven. This was an established relationship, complete with intimate gestures and comfortable familiarity. This was Vincent living an entirely separate life that I knew nothing about. I sank into my office chair, staring out the window at the parking lot where Vincent's car wasn't parked because he was supposedly at his office across town, preparing for his business dinner tonight. The business dinner that was apparently happening right now, just not with the kind of business I'd imagined. "Are they still there?" I asked. "Yes, they just ordered coffee. It looks like they're settling in for a while." My mind started racing with calculations. Bellacorte was a 20-minute drive from my office if I hit traffic right. I could be there before they finished their coffee. I could walk in and confront them both, create the kind of scene that would embarrass Vincent in front of his, what was she? His girlfriend? His mistress? The woman he was apparently planning to spend the evening with while telling me it was business? But something deeper than rage was taking over. Something colder and more calculated. If I stormed in, there now, emotional and unprepared, Vincent would have the advantage. He was a lawyer, trained to think quickly under pressure, skilled at crafting explanations that sounded plausible even when they were complete fabrications. He would find a way to minimize this, to make me feel like I was overreacting, to convince, Me that what I was seeing wasn't what I thought it was. No. If I was going to confront my husband's betrayal, I was going to do it on my terms, with the element of surprise firmly in my corner. "Rachel," I said, my voice steadying with newfound resolve, "I need you to do me a favor. Keep watching them, but don't let them see you. Text me when they're getting ready to leave. I'm coming over there, but I'm not going to confront them." "Not yet." "What are you planning to do?" I stared at my reflection in my office window, watching as the devastated wife began to transform into something harder, more dangerous. "I'm going to get a front row seat to my husband's lies. And then I'm going to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate the woman you promised to love and honor for the rest of your life." The drive to Bellacorte felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life, but also like preparation for battle. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I sat in my car outside Bellacorte for exactly 7 minutes, watching other couples walk hand in hand through the restaurant's elegant glass doors, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world was crumbling just 20 feet away from their romantic dinners. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribcage like a caged bird desperate for escape. But I needed proof. Real, undeniable, concrete evidence that would make it impossible for Vincent to manipulate his way out of this with his silver tongue and legal training. Rachel's eyewitness account was devastating, but Vincent was skilled at creating reasonable doubt, at making people question what they thought they'd seen. I'd watched him work his magic in our social circles before, smoothing over awkward situations with charm and carefully crafted explanations that made everyone feel foolish for ever doubting him. I pulled out my phone and called the restaurant, directly putting on my most professional voice, the same tone I used when conducting intake calls for new therapy clients. "Good afternoon. This is Dr. Hartwell's office calling to confirm an appointment. I believe Mr. Vincent Hartwell has a reservation there today?" The hostess was immediately helpful. "Oh yes, Mr. Hartwell. He's one of our regular guests. He's here right now, actually, at his usual table for 2. Would you like me to get him a message?" His usual table. Regular guest. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't a one-time indiscretion or a moment of weakness. This was a pattern, a routine, a whole separate life that Vincent had been living while I remained completely oblivious at home, planning our future and believing in our forever. "No message necessary," I managed to say. "I just wanted to confirm he was there. Thank you." I hung up and immediately called Vincent's law firm, asking to speak with him directly. His secretary, Janet, picked up on the second ring with her usual cheerful efficiency. "Hartwell and Associates. This is Janet speaking." "Hi, Janet, it's Sophia. Is Vincent available? I wanted to catch him before his big client dinner tonight." There was a pause that lasted just a fraction too long. "Oh, Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry. But Mr. Hartwell left the office around noon today. He said he had an important off-site meeting that would run through the evening. He mentioned he might not be back in the office until tomorrow morning." An off-site meeting. That was Vincent's story to his secretary, just like the emergency client dinner was his story to me. I wondered how many different versions of tonight's events he'd crafted, tailoring each lie to his specific audience. "Did he mention where this meeting was taking place?" I asked, keeping my voice light and curious rather than suspicious. "No, he just said it was confidential client business. You know how he is about maintaining attorney-client privilege." Yes, I knew exactly how he was about maintaining secrets. Apparently, he was better at it than I'd ever imagined. I thanked Janet and hung up, then immediately opened my banking app to check our joint account activity. What I found there made my stomach drop to somewhere around my ankles. Over the past 3 months, there had been regular charges to Bellacorte, always for exactly 2 people, always on Tuesday afternoons, always charged to our joint credit card. The same card I used to buy groceries and pay for my office supplies, blissfully unaware that I was also funding my husband's affair. But that wasn't the worst part. As I scrolled through the charges, I found a pattern of expenditures that painted a picture of a double life so elaborate it would have impressed fiction writers. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Co., charges to La Perla, an upscale lingerie boutique, flowers from the most expensive florist in Millbrook, delivered to an address I didn't recognize, hotel charges for the Grandview Resort, a luxury spa destination, about an hour outside the city, always booked for romantic weekend packages. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Every purchase was a betrayal, every charge a lie, every transaction proof that while I'd been building what I thought was our life together, Vincent had been building a completely separate existence with someone else. I screenshot every suspicious charge, methodically building a digital file of evidence that no amount of Vincent's legal expertise could explain away. The emerald necklace Rachel had mentioned? There it was. A $4,200 charge to Morrison Fine Jewelry from 2 weeks ago. The same week, Vincent had told me he was too busy with work to celebrate our wedding anniversary properly, promising we'd do something special when things calmed down at the firm. The lingerie purchases made me physically nauseous. Vincent hadn't bought me anything intimate in years, claiming he wasn't good at picking out those kinds of things. Apparently, he'd developed quite the talent when shopping for someone else. Called Morrison Fine Jewelry next, again using my professional voice. Hi, this is Dr. Hartwell calling about a recent purchase my husband made. Vincent Hartwell? I believe he bought an emerald necklace about 2 weeks ago. The sales associate was immediately enthusiastic. Oh, yes. Mr. Hartwell is such a romantic. He's been in several times over the past few months, always looking for something special for his girlfriend. The emerald necklace was a particularly beautiful piece. He said green was her favorite color because it matched her eyes. Her favorite color. Her eyes. Not mine. Vincent knew perfectly well that my eyes were brown and that emeralds were special to me because of my birthday, not my eye color. He'd created an entirely new romantic narrative with this woman, complete with intimate details and personal preferences that had nothing to do with his wife. He mentioned they were celebrating a special milestone. The sales associate continued cheerfully. 6 months together, I think he said. He was very specific about wanting something that would commemorate the occasion properly. 6 months. Vincent had been maintaining this relationship for half a year, long enough to establish anniversaries and milestones worth celebrating with expensive jewelry. While I'd been worrying about his stress levels and increased work hours, he'd been falling in love with someone else. I thanked the jeweler and hung up, then sat in my car staring at the restaurant entrance, processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This wasn't an affair. It was a complete alternate life. Vincent hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd systematically constructed an elaborate deception that involved our finances, our time, and apparently our future. My phone buzzed with another text from Rachel. They're asking for the check. Looks like they're getting ready to leave soon. Are you here yet? I looked up at Bellacorte's elegant facade, its warm lighting spilling onto the sidewalk where other couples were arriving for their own dinners, their own celebrations, their own presumably honest relationships. In a few minutes, Vincent would walk out of that restaurant with his mistress, probably planning to head back to whatever hotel room he'd booked for their evening together, completely unaware that his wife was sitting 50 feet away with enough evidence to destroy the careful fiction he'd been living. But I wasn't going to confront them in the parking lot like some desperate, hysterical wife. I had a better idea. A much better idea. I texted Rachel back. I'm here. When they leave, follow them discreetly and let me know where they go next. I'm going inside to have a little chat with their waiter. It was time to turn Vincent's own romantic evening against him. I waited exactly 12 minutes after Rachel texted me that Vincent and his mistress had left the restaurant, giving them enough time to clear the immediate area before I made my entrance. During those 12 minutes, I transformed myself from devastated wife into calculated strategist, checking my appearance in the rearview mirror and applying a fresh coat of lipstick with hands that had finally stopped trembling. The woman who stepped out of that car was not the same woman who had answered Rachel's devastating phone call 2 hours earlier. This woman had purpose. This woman had a plan. The hostess at Bellacorte greeted me with the kind of polished warmth that expensive restaurants cultivate like a fine wine. "Good evening. Welcome to Bellacorte. Do you have a reservation?" "Actually, I'm hoping you can help me with something rather delicate," I said, sliding a crisp $50 bill across the mahogany hostess stand. "My husband was just here with a business associate. I was supposed to join them, but I got held up at work." "Vincent Hartwell? I believe they were at his usual table?" Recognition flickered across her face immediately. "Oh yes, Mr. Hartwell. Such a lovely couple. They just left about 15 minutes ago. I'm so sorry you missed them." A lovely couple. The words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't suppose you could tell me which server was taking care of their table. I'd love to leave a tip for excellent service and perhaps get some insight into how their meeting went." Another 50 joined the first, and the hostess's smile became genuinely helpful. "That would be Marcus. He's been Mr. Hartwell's preferred server for months now. He just finished clearing their table, actually. I'm sure he'd be happy to speak with you." She led me through the restaurant's elegantly appointed dining room, past tables of couples sharing intimate dinners and business associates closing deals over expensive wine. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was walking through a temple to romance and fine dining while planning what might be the most calculated act of revenge of my life. Marcus turned out to be a distinguished man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of professional bearing that suggested decades of experience reading people and situations. When the hostess introduced me as Mrs. Hartwell and discreetly withdrew, his expression immediately became more guarded. "Mrs. Hartwell?" he said carefully. I wasn't aware that Mr. Hartwell was married. The admission hit me like a physical blow, but I'd prepared myself for this. Of course, Vincent hadn't mentioned having a wife. That would have complicated his romantic narrative considerably. "I can see this is awkward," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I'm not here to create a scene or put you in an uncomfortable position. I'm here because I need to understand exactly what my husband has been doing with his Tuesday afternoons." Marcus glanced around the restaurant nervously, clearly weighing his options. The professional in him wanted to maintain client confidentiality, but the human in him was obviously struggling with the moral implications of what he'd been witnessing. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" I suggested, gesturing toward a quiet corner booth that had just been vacated. "I promise you, I'm not looking to cause trouble for you or the restaurant. I just need the truth." We sat across from each other in the dimly lit booth, and I could see Marcus making his decision. Finally, he leaned forward slightly and spoke in a low voice. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've been serving your husband and Ms. Crawford for approximately 6 months now. They come in every Tuesday at exactly 2:30. Always request the same corner table. Always order the same bottle of wine to start. In my experience, that level of routine suggests, well, an established relationship, Ms. Crawford." Finally, the mystery woman had a name. It felt strange to put such a normal, everyday surname on the person who had unknowingly helped destroy my marriage. "Can you tell me about their behavior together?" I asked. "I need to understand the nature of their relationship." Marcus looked uncomfortable, but continued. "They're very affectionate, hand-holding, intimate conversation, the kind of body language you see with couples who are deeply involved with each other. Ms. Crawford often wears jewelry that your husband comments on admiringly. Last week, I overheard him telling her how beautiful she looked in the emerald necklace he'd given her. The emerald necklace. Hearing about it from a third party made it somehow more real, more devastating. Vincent had been sharing intimate moments with this woman, buying her jewelry, creating memories that had nothing to do with our marriage. "Have you overheard any of their conversations?" I pressed gently. Marcus hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to know that I've served many couples over the years, and I can usually tell the difference between casual dating and serious relationships. Your husband and Ms. Crawford, they talk about the future. I've heard discussions about weekend trips, about meeting each other's friends, about plans for the holidays. The holidays. Vincent and I had already started making Thanksgiving plans, discussing whether to host my parents or travel to see his family in Colorado. All while he was apparently making entirely different holiday plans with another woman. Is there anything else you think I should know? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke again. 3 weeks ago, your husband asked me about private dining rooms. He said he was planning something special for Ms. Crawford's birthday, next month, something that required absolute privacy and romance. He put down a deposit for our most exclusive suite. A birthday celebration. Private dining room. Vincent was planning elaborate romantic gestures for this woman while barely remembering to acknowledge my own birthday the month before with a hastily purchased bouquet from the grocery store. Marcus? I said, pulling out my phone and showing him a photo of Vincent and me from our last anniversary dinner. I need you to do something for me, and I'll make it worth your while. He studied the photo, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he recognized Vincent. What do you need, Mrs. Hartwell? Next Tuesday, when they come in for their usual lunch, I want you to deliver a message to my husband. A very specific message that I'm going to write out for you. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notebook and pen. But first, I need you to tell me everything you remember about their conversations. Every detail, every plan they've made, every intimate moment you've witnessed. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus provided me with a devastating catalog of my husband's secret life. Weekend getaways to wine country that coincided with Vincent's supposed business trips. Discussions about Ms. Crawford's job at a marketing firm downtown, which explained how they'd likely met during some professional interaction. Plans for a Christmas vacation to Aspen that sounded remarkably similar to the trip Vincent had suggested we take together. Most painfully, Marcus had overheard Vincent telling Ms. Crawford about his unhappy marriage to a woman who was more like a roommate than a wife, someone who was too focused on her career to nurture their relationship. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that I realized Vincent had been crafting this alternate narrative for months, maybe longer. As Marcus spoke, I took careful notes, building a comprehensive picture of the life Vincent had been living without me. Every detail would be useful for what I was planning. Every overheard conversation another piece of ammunition for the confrontation I was orchestrating. When he finished, I looked up from my notes and met his eyes. Marcus, I'm going to write something down, and next Tuesday I want you to deliver it to Vincent exactly as you would any other message. Can you do that for me? He nodded slowly. Mrs. Hartwell, for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this. In all my years of service, I've never enjoyed watching someone live a lie. I smiled grimly and began writing, crafting the perfect message. One that would shatter Vincent's comfortable deception in the most public, humiliating way possible. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Tuesday to spring it. The following. Tuesday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I had spent the previous 6 days meticulously planning every detail of what I'd come to think of as Vincent's Judgment Day. During those 6 days, I maintained the perfect facade of the unsuspecting wife, continuing our normal routines while secretly documenting every lie that fell from his lips. Monday evening, Vincent had kissed me goodbye before heading to what he claimed was a late strategy session with his partners about an upcoming merger. Don't wait up, sweetheart, he'd said, straightening his tie in our hallway mirror. This could go well past midnight. I'd smiled and told him I understood, even helped him choose a tie that would complement his navy suit. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already confirmed the offices of Hartwell and Associates were completely dark by 8 p.m., and that his strategy session was actually a romantic dinner at Giovanni's, an intimate Italian restaurant across town, followed by a night at the Grandview Resort. I knew this because I'd hired a private investigator. Rebecca Chen came highly recommended by one of my therapy colleagues who'd used her services during her own messy divorce 3 years earlier. Rebecca was thorough, discreet, and surprisingly affordable for someone with her reputation. Over the past week, she'd provided me with a comprehensive dossier on Vincent's relationship with Clarissa Crawford, because yes, I now knew her full name, her employment history, her apartment address, and even her coffee preferences. Clarissa was 32 years old, a senior marketing director at Pinnacle Communications, divorced with no children, and according to Rebecca's investigation, completely unaware that Vincent was married. The photos Rebecca had taken showed a woman who was genuinely happy, laughing at Vincent's jokes, gazing at him with the kind of adoration I remembered feeling during our early years together. In a twisted way, I almost felt sorry for her. She was as much a victim of Vincent's deception as I was, just from a different angle. But sympathy would have to wait. Today was about justice. I arrived at Bellacorte at exactly 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes before Vincent and Clarissa's usual arrival time. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a sleek black dress that made me look professional and intimidating, paired with the pearl necklace Vincent had given me for our 10th anniversary. If I was going to confront my husband's betrayal, I was going to look like the successful, confident woman I'd become despite his lies. Marcus spotted me immediately as I entered the restaurant. We'd spoken twice more over the past week, once when I came in to review the seating arrangements and again yesterday to confirm the final details of our plan. He approached me with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he understood the gravity of what we were about to do. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said quietly, guiding me toward a table that offered a perfect view of Vincent's usual corner booth, while keeping me partially concealed behind a decorative column. "Everything is arranged exactly as you requested. Table 12 is prepared, and I have your message ready." I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope containing a generous tip for Marcus, along with a handwritten note expressing my gratitude for his help. "Remember," I said, "wait until they've ordered their wine and settled into conversation. I want them relaxed and comfortable before you deliver the message." Marcus nodded and withdrew to attend to his other tables, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my racing heart. Despite all my preparation, despite the careful planning and the evidence I'd gathered, I still felt the weight of what I was about to do. In a few minutes, I would detonate a bomb in the middle of Vincent's carefully constructed double life, and there would be no going back. At 2:31 p.m., Vincent walked through Bellacorte's front door, and my breath caught in my throat despite everything I knew, everything I'd prepared for. He looked handsome and confident, wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd helped him pick out last Christmas, his hair perfectly styled, his smile bright with anticipation. For just a moment, seeing him like this, I could almost understand why Clarissa had fallen for him. Vincent had always been charming when he wanted to be. Clarissa appeared beside him seconds later, and I had to admit that the photographs Rebecca had taken didn't do her justice. She was stunning in person, tall and elegant in a way that spoke of expensive personal trainers and regular spa treatments. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and she wore a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The emerald necklace, my emerald necklace, purchased with my money, caught the restaurant's ambient lighting and sparkled like captured starlight against her pale skin. But it was their body language that truly drove home the reality of their relationship. Vincent's hand rested possessively on the small of her back as they followed the hostess to their table. Clarissa leaned into him naturally, comfortably, the way couples do when they've moved past the awkward early stages of romance into something deeper and more intimate. When they were seated, Vincent immediately reached across the table to take her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had once been reserved exclusively for me. I watched as they settled into their familiar routine, Vincent helping Clarissa with her coat, both of them laughing at some private joke, their heads close together as they perused the wine list. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together. They looked like everything I'd thought Vincent and I were, but apparently never had been. Marcus approached their table with perfect timing, just as they'd finished ordering their usual bottle of Bordeaux and were relaxing into what they clearly expected to be another romantic lunch. I could see Vincent's face clearly from my vantage point, could observe every nuance of his expression as Marcus leaned down and spoke quietly into his ear. "Excuse me, Mr. Hartwell, but I have a message for you from someone who wanted to make sure you received it today." Vincent looked puzzled but not alarmed as Marcus placed the folded piece of cream-colored stationery beside his wine glass. I'd spent considerable time crafting the message, writing and rewriting until the words carried exactly the impact I wanted them to have. "From someone?" Vincent asked, his brow furrowing with confusion. "Yes, sir. A woman who said you'd know exactly who she was once you read it." Vincent picked up the note with casual curiosity, unfolding it with the same easy confidence he brought to everything in his life. I held my breath as his eyes scanned the words I'd written, watching as his expression shifted from puzzlement to recognition to absolute, paralyzing terror. The message was simple, direct, and devastating. "Hello, darling. I know about Clarissa. The emerald necklace, the Tuesday lunches, the weekend getaways, and the private dining room you've reserved for her birthday. Your wife would like a word. Turn around." And that's when I stood up from behind the column and let him see me, wine glass raised in a mock toast, my smile sharp enough to cut glass. The moment Vincent's eyes met mine across that crowded restaurant was electric in the most devastating way possible. I watched 12 years of marriage flash across his face in real time. Our wedding day, our first apartment, lazy Sunday mornings, shared dreams, whispered promises. All of it crumbling into dust as the reality of his situation hit him, like a freight train. His face went through a spectacular transformation that would have been almost comical if it weren't destroying my life. The casual confidence drained away first, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror, and finally something that looked remarkably like a cornered animal, realizing there was no escape route. His hand, still holding my note, began to tremble so violently that the paper rustled audibly in the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Clarissa, oblivious to the drama unfolding, leaned forward with concern etched across her beautiful features. "Vincent, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. How perfectly appropriate. Because the woman Vincent thought he'd safely tucked away in his other life. The wife he'd convinced Clarissa didn't really exist in any meaningful way, had just materialized to haunt his carefully constructed paradise. "Vincent," Clarissa pressed, her voice taking on an edge of worry. "Who sent that note? What does it say?" I could see Vincent's lawyer brain desperately trying to formulate some explanation, some way to minimize the catastrophe that was unfolding. But for once in his silver-tongued life, words seemed to have completely abandoned him. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for water. That's when I decided to help him out. I began walking toward their table, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the steady rhythm of an execution march. Other diners were starting to notice the drama, conversations growing quieter as heads turned to follow my purposeful stride across the restaurant. Vincent tracked my approach with the kind of horrified fascination people have when watching an avalanche bearing down on them. "Hello, sweetheart," I said when I reached their table, my voice carrying just enough warmth to sound loving while being cold enough to freeze hellfire. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your romantic lunch." Clarissa's head snapped up, her green eyes, the ones Vincent had apparently written poetry about, according to Rebecca's surveillance reports, widening with confusion. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "We haven't been formally introduced," I replied, extending my hand with perfect social grace. "I'm Sophia Hartwell, Vincent's wife." The words hit Clarissa like a physical blow. Her face went pale beneath her expertly applied makeup, and I could see her mind racing to process this impossible information. "Wife?" she repeated, the word barely above a whisper. Vincent finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "Sophia, what are you doing here? This isn't what it looks like." I laughed then, a sound that was equal parts bitter and genuinely amused. "Really, Vincent, it's not what it looks like. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like my husband having a romantic lunch with his mistress, wearing the tie I helped him choose this morning, at the restaurant where you've been meeting every Tuesday for 6 months. Clarissa's hand flew to her throat, touching the emerald necklace that had become such a symbol of Vincent's betrayal. "Vincent, you told me you were divorced. You said your marriage ended years ago, that you were just waiting for the paperwork to be finalized. Did he now?" I turned my attention to Clarissa, and despite everything, I felt a stab of genuine sympathy for her. "That's interesting, because we renewed our vows just 18 months ago, in Hawaii. I have pictures if you'd like to see them." The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter, other diners now openly staring at our table as the drama unfolded. Marcus hovered nearby, clearly torn between professional discretion and morbid fascination. Vincent made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Sophia, please, can we discuss this privately? This isn't the place for..." "For what, Vincent? For honesty? For truth? For acknowledging that you've been living a double life while I've been planning our future?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the screenshots I'd taken of our bank statements. "Should we discuss this privately the way you privately spent $4,000 on her necklace using our joint account? Or the way you privately booked romantic getaways while telling me you were on business trips?" Clarissa's face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of green. "Vincent, is this true? Are you really married? Are you really still living with her?" "It's complicated," Vincent said weakly. "No, it's really not," I interjected. "It's actually quite simple. Vincent is married to me. We live together in the house on Elmwood Drive. We share a bed, a bank account, and until about a week ago, I thought we shared a future. The only complicated part is how he managed to convince you otherwise." Clarissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet restaurant. "I need to go," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't. This is insane. Vincent, you told me she was basically a stranger, that you hadn't been intimate in years, that you were just waiting for the right time to file divorce papers. We made love last Sunday morning," I said quietly, watching Vincent flinch as if I'd struck him. "Right after he brought me coffee in bed and told me how much he loved me." I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope containing a generous tip for Marcus, along with a handwritten note expressing my gratitude for his help. "Remember," I said, "wait until they've ordered their wine and settled into conversation. I want them relaxed and comfortable before you deliver the message." Marcus nodded and withdrew to attend to his other tables, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my racing heart. Despite all my preparation, despite the careful planning and the evidence I'd gathered, I still felt the weight of what I was about to do. In a few minutes, I would detonate a bomb in the middle of Vincent's carefully constructed double life, and there would be no going back. At 2:31 p.m., Vincent walked through Bellacorte's front door, and my breath caught in my throat despite everything I knew, everything I'd prepared for. He looked handsome and confident, wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd helped him pick out last Christmas, his hair perfectly styled, his smile bright with anticipation. For just a moment, seeing him like this, I could almost understand why Clarissa had fallen for him. Vincent had always been charming when he wanted to be. Clarissa appeared beside him seconds later, and I had to admit that the photographs Rebecca had taken didn't do her justice. She was stunning in person, tall and elegant in a way that spoke of expensive personal trainers and regular spa treatments. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and she wore a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The emerald necklace, my emerald necklace, purchased with my money, caught the restaurant's ambient lighting and sparkled like captured starlight against her pale skin. But it was their body language that truly drove home the reality of their relationship. Vincent's hand rested possessively on the small of her back as they followed the hostess to their table. Clarissa leaned into him naturally, comfortably, the way couples do when they've moved past the awkward early stages of romance into something deeper and more intimate. When they were seated, Vincent immediately reached across the table to take her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had once been reserved exclusively for me. I watched as they settled into their familiar routine, Vincent helping Clarissa with her coat, both of them laughing at some private joke, their heads close together as they perused the wine list. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together. They looked like everything I'd thought Vincent and I were, but apparently never had been. Marcus approached their table with perfect timing, just as they'd finished ordering their usual bottle of Bordeaux and were relaxing into what they clearly expected to be another romantic lunch. I could see Vincent's face clearly from my vantage point, could observe every nuance of his expression as Marcus leaned down and spoke quietly into his ear. "Excuse me, Mr. Hartwell, but I have a message for you from someone who wanted to make sure you received it today." Vincent looked puzzled but not alarmed as Marcus placed the folded piece of cream-colored stationery beside his wine glass. "I'd spent considerable time crafting the message, writing and rewriting until the words carried exactly the impact I wanted them to have." "From someone?" Vincent asked, his brow furrowing with confusion. "Yes, sir. A woman who said you'd know exactly who she was once you read it." Vincent picked up the note with casual curiosity, unfolding it with the same easy confidence he brought to everything in his life. I held my breath as his eyes scanned the words I'd written, watching as his expression shifted from puzzlement to recognition to absolute paralyzing terror. The message was simple, direct, and devastating. "Hello, darling. I know about Clarissa, the emerald necklace, the Tuesday lunches, the weekend getaways, and the private dining room you've reserved for her birthday. Your wife would like a word. Turn around." And that's when I stood up from behind the column and let him see me, wine glass raised in a mock toast, my smile sharp enough to cut glass. The moment Vincent's eyes met mine across that crowded restaurant was electric in the most devastating way possible. I watched 12 years of marriage flash across his face in real time. Our wedding day, our first apartment, lazy Sunday mornings, shared dreams, whispered promises. All of it crumbling into dust as the reality of his situation hit him, like a freight train. His face went through a spectacular transformation that would have been almost comical if it weren't destroying my life. The casual confidence drained away first, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror, and finally something that looked remarkably like a cornered animal realizing there was no escape route. His hand, still holding my note, began to tremble so violently that the paper rustled audibly in the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Clarissa, oblivious to the drama unfolding, leaned forward with concern etched across her beautiful features. "Vincent, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost? How perfectly appropriate. Because the woman Vincent thought he'd safely tucked away in his other life, the wife he'd convinced Clarissa didn't really exist in any meaningful way, had just materialized to haunt his carefully constructed paradise. "Vincent?" Clarissa pressed, her voice taking on an edge of worry. "Who sent that note? What does it say?" I could see Vincent's lawyer brain desperately trying to formulate some explanation, some way to minimize the catastrophe that was unfolding. But for once in his silver-tongued life, words seemed to have completely abandoned him. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for water. That's when I decided to help him out. I began walking toward their table, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the steady rhythm of an execution march. Other diners were starting to notice the drama, conversations growing quieter as heads turned to follow my purposeful stride across the restaurant. Vincent tracked my approach with the kind of horrified fascination people have when watching an avalanche bearing down on them. "Hello, sweetheart," I said when I reached their table, my voice carrying just enough warmth to sound loving while being cold enough to freeze hellfire. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your romantic lunch." Clarissa's head snapped up, her green eyes, the ones Vincent had apparently written poetry about according to Rebecca's surveillance reports, widening with confusion. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "We haven't been formally introduced," I replied, extending my hand with perfect social grace. "I'm Sophia Hartwell, Vincent's wife." The words hit Clarissa like a physical blow. Her face went pale beneath her expertly applied makeup, and I could see her mind racing to process this. "Impossible information? Wife," she repeated, the word barely above a whisper. Vincent finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "Sophia, what are you doing here? This isn't what it looks like." I laughed then, a sound that was equal parts bitter and genuinely amused. "Really, Vincent? It's not what it looks like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like my husband having a romantic lunch with his mistress, wearing the tie I helped him choose this morning at the restaurant where you've been meeting every Tuesday for 6 months. Clarissa's hand flew to her throat, touching the emerald necklace that had become such a symbol of Vincent's betrayal. "Vincent, you told me you were divorced. You said your marriage ended years ago, that you were just waiting for the paperwork to be finalized. Did he now?" I turned my attention to Clarissa, and despite everything, I felt a stab of genuine sympathy for her. "That's interesting, because we renewed our vows just 18 months ago. In Hawaii. I have pictures if you'd like to see them." The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter, other diners now openly staring at our table as the drama unfolded. Marcus hovered nearby, clearly torn between professional discretion and morbid fascination. Vincent made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Sophia, please, can we discuss this privately? This isn't the place for what, Vincent? For honesty? For truth? For acknowledging that you've been living a double life while I've been planning our future?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the screenshots I'd taken of our bank statements. "Should we discuss this privately the way you privately spent $4,000 on her necklace using our joint account? Or the way you privately booked romantic getaways while telling me you were on business trips?" Clarissa's face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of green. "Vincent, is this true? Are you really married? Are you really still living with her?" "It's complicated," Vincent said weakly. "No, it's really not," I interjected. "It's actually quite simple. Vincent is married to me. We live together in the house on Elmwood Drive. We share a bed, a bank account, and until about a week ago I thought we shared a future. The only complicated part is how he managed to convince you otherwise." Clarissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet restaurant. "I need to go," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't. This is insane. Vincent, you told me she was basically a stranger, that you hadn't been intimate in years, that you were just waiting for the right time to file divorce papers." "We made love last Sunday morning," I said quietly, watching Vincent flinch as if I'd struck him. "Right after he brought me coffee in bed and told me how much he loved me." The devastation on Clarissa's face was almost painful to witness. She grabbed her purse with trembling hands, looking between Vincent and me as if we were both speaking a foreign language. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months of believing I'd found someone honest, someone who loved me enough to build a future with me. "And you're just a liar. You're both married and lying to everyone." She turned to me, tears starting to form in those green eyes Vincent had apparently found so captivating. "And you. How long have you known? How long have you been watching us, planning this?" 1 week, I replied honestly. "I found out 1 week ago, and I've spent that time documenting every lie your boyfriend told both of us." Vincent finally seemed to find his spine, standing up and reaching for Clarissa's arm. "Clarissa, please, let me explain. This isn't how I wanted you to find out, but—" She jerked away from his touch as if he'd burned her. "Don't. Just don't. Touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't ever contact me again." She looked around the restaurant, suddenly seeming to realize that every eye in the place was on us. "I have to get out of here." And with that, she fled, practically running toward the exit, leaving Vincent standing there looking like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse in real time. Which, I suppose, he had. I turned back to my husband, the man I'd loved for 12 years, the man I'd trusted with my heart, my future, and my financial security. "Well, Vincent," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the restaurant's stunned silence, "I believe you were about to explain how this isn't what it looks like." But Vincent just stood there, swaying slightly, looking like he might either vomit or faint. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that might have been satisfaction. Justice, it turned out. Tasted exactly like expensive wine and complete vindication. Vincent and I sat in the suffocating silence of our living room at 11:47 p.m. that night, the space between us on the couch feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. He'd barely spoken during the drive home from Bellacorte, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, while I stared out the passenger window, watching our neighborhood pass by in a blur of familiar houses that suddenly felt foreign. The restaurant had cleared out around us after Clarissa's dramatic exit, other diners paying their checks hastily and avoiding eye contact as they filed past our table. Vincent had sat back down heavily, his head in his hands, while I calmly finished my wine and ordered dessert. If I was going to destroy my marriage in public, I was at least going to enjoy the tiramisu. Now, in the lamplight of our home, the home we'd chosen together, decorated together, filled with 12 years of shared memories, Vincent looked like a man who'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. His usually perfect hair was disheveled from running his fingers through it, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident posture replaced by the slumped shoulders of complete defeat. "Say something," he finally whispered, breaking the silence that had stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. I looked at him, really looked at him, studying the face I'd kissed goodbye thousands of times, the hands that had held mine during our wedding ceremony, the mouth that had promised to love and honor me for better or worse. "What would you like me to say, Vincent? That I understand? That it's okay? That we can work through this?" He lifted his head, hope flickering in those green eyes that had once made my heart race. "Can we? Work through this, I mean?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 12 years of history and the smoking ruins of everything we'd built together. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, running my fingers along the framed photographs that documented our life together. Our wedding day, when we'd both looked so young and certain about our forever. Vacation pictures from Italy, Greece, Colorado, holiday celebrations with both our families, anniversary dinners, birthday parties, a dozen years of moments that I'd thought were precious to both of us. "Tell me about her," I said, not turning around. "Not the lies you told me, not the version you gave your secretary or your friends. Tell me the truth about Clarissa Crawford." Vincent was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I met her at a legal conference 8 months ago. She was there representing her firm for a panel on marketing strategies for professional services. She was intelligent, confident, different from me," I finished when he trailed off. "Different from us," he corrected. "Different from what we'd become. Sophia, you have to understand, we'd been growing apart for years. We were like roommates sharing space, going through the motions of marriage without any real connection. I turned around then, studying his face. Is that really what you believed? That we were just roommates? Weren't we? He leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone I'd heard him use in court. When was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about schedules or bills or work? When was the last time you looked at me the way you used to? When was the last time we made love because we wanted each other, not just because it was expected? His words stung because there was a kernel of truth buried in them. We had fallen into routines, patterns of behavior that felt safe and comfortable, but perhaps lacked the passion of our early years. But that was marriage, wasn't it? The evolution from burning intensity to steady warmth, from desperate need to comfortable companionship. So you decided to find that passion somewhere else, I said. Instead of talking to me, instead of suggesting counseling, instead of working on us, you chose to betray everything we'd built together. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said, his voice breaking. It just evolved. One conversation led to another, then coffee, then dinner. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already in too deep. 8 months, Vincent. 6 months of regular Tuesday lunches, hotel rooms, jewelry, love letters. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. This was a relationship. You were building a life with her while lying to me every single day. He stood up and began pacing, the nervous energy that had served him well in courtrooms now making him look like a caged animal. You want to know the truth? The complete, honest truth? I was happy with her. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. I felt desired, appreciated, interesting. Clarissa looked at me like I was the most fascinating man in the world, not just someone to split the mortgage with. The honesty was brutal, but I'd asked for it. And that justified the lies? The deception? Using our money to fund your affair? No, he said quickly. Nothing justifies that. But Sophia, we both know our marriage has been dying for years. I found a way to feel alive again. By making me feel dead inside? I moved to the window, looking out at the garden where we'd planted roses together in happier times. Do you know what the worst part is, Vincent? It's not the sex, though that hurts. It's not even the money, though that's a betrayal all its own. It's that you rewrote our entire history to justify your actions. You told her I was cold, career-obsessed, that our marriage was over in everything but name. You created a version of me that was the villain in your love story. I never meant to hurt you, he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. But you did hurt me. Systematically, deliberately, every single day for 8 months. Every lie you told me, every lie you told her, every dollar you spent on someone else, every moment you chose her over me. It all hurt me. The only difference is that I didn't know I was bleeding. Vincent sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands again. What do you want me to do? I'll end it completely. I'll quit my job if necessary to avoid seeing her. I'll do anything to save our marriage. It's too late for that, I said quietly, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. You already ended our marriage, Vincent. You ended it the first time you kissed her, the first time you told her you loved her, the first time you planned a future that didn't include me. I'm just acknowledging what you made real months ago. Sophia, please. We can go to counseling. We can take a trip, rebuild what we had. I love you. I've always loved you. I turned to face him. This man who had been my partner, my best friend, my safe harbor for 12 years. Do you know what I realized today, watching you with her? You looked happier in that restaurant than I've seen you in our own home in years. And maybe that's the real truth we both need to face. He stared at me, tears starting to form in his eyes. Are you saying you want a divorce? I'm saying that our marriage died somewhere along the way, and neither of us had the courage to acknowledge it until you found someone else to make you feel alive. Maybe Clarissa was just the symptom, not the disease. The words hung between us like a death sentence, final and irrevocable. In the distance, I could hear our grandfather clock chiming midnight, marking the end of the longest day of my life and the beginning of whatever came next. "I'm going to stay in the guest room tonight," Vincent said finally. "Tomorrow, we should probably call lawyers." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to feel anything but a strange sense of relief. "Vincent, for what it's worth, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I just wish you'd been honest enough to look for it without destroying me in the process." He paused at the doorway, looking back at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Sophia, for all of it. You deserved so much better." As his footsteps faded down the hallway, I sank into my chair and finally let the tears come, not just for the marriage that was ending, but for the woman I'd been when it began, and for the uncertain but strangely hopeful woman I was about to become. 18 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking Riverside Park, watching the early morning joggers trace their familiar paths along the waterfront while steam rose from my coffee cup in lazy spirals. The space was smaller than the house on Elmwood Drive, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture chosen by me, every photograph on the walls reflecting my taste alone, every decision made without consultation or compromise. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, quicker than most because Vincent hadn't contested anything. Guilt, it turned out, was an excellent motivator for reasonable settlements. He'd kept the house, I'd kept my practice and half our assets, and we'd both kept our dignity intact through a process that could have turned ugly, but remained surprisingly civil. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Mrs. Chen is here for her 9 a.m. appointment. Should I start the coffee?" Rebecca Chen, my former private investigator turned close friend, had become one of my first clients when I'd expanded my practice to include relationship counseling for women recovering from infidelity and betrayal. Her own story of discovering her ex-husband's gambling addiction and secret debts had given her insights into deception that complemented my professional training perfectly. We'd developed a unique therapeutic approach that combined traditional counseling with practical investigation techniques, helping women uncover the truth about their relationships before making life-changing decisions. The irony wasn't lost on me that Vincent's betrayal had ultimately led to the most fulfilling period of my professional life. Word had spread through Millbrook's professional networks about the therapist who'd caught her cheating husband in spectacular fashion, and my client roster had exploded with women seeking guidance on everything from suspicious behavior to divorce proceedings. I'd become something of a specialist in the psychology of deception, publishing articles in professional journals and speaking at conferences about the intersection of therapeutic practice and investigative reality. My personal life had taken longer to rebuild, but even that was finally beginning to flourish. David Morrison, no relation to the jewelry store that had unknowingly provided evidence of Vincent's affairs, was a literature professor at Millbrook College who'd approached me after one of my lectures on trust and rebuilding relationships. Our first coffee had turned into dinner. Dinner had turned into weekend conversations that stretched late into the night. And slowly, carefully, I'd begun to remember what it felt like to be genuinely cherished rather than simply taken for granted. David knew my entire story, had listened to every detail of Vincent's betrayal without judgment or advice, simply accepting my experience as part of what had shaped me into the woman he'd fallen in love with. He understood my need for transparency, my occasional moments of doubt, my requirement that we build something based on complete honesty rather than comfortable assumptions. Most importantly, he made me laugh, deep, genuine laughter that I'd forgotten I was capable of experiencing. The morning news was playing softly in the background as I prepared for my day, and a familiar name caught my attention. I turned up the volume to hear the anchor discussing a legal scandal that had erupted at one of Millbrook's most prestigious law firms. Vincent Hartwell, former senior partner at Hartwell and Associates, has agreed to a plea deal in the federal investigation into securities fraud and client fund misappropriation, Sources close to the investigation suggest Hartwell used confidential client information to make unauthorized investments, resulting in losses exceeding $2 million. His law license has been permanently revoked, and he faces up to 5 years in federal prison. I sat down heavily, my coffee forgotten as the reporter continued detailing charges that painted a picture of financial crimes far more extensive than simple marital infidelity. According to the news report, Vincent had been systematically stealing from client accounts for years, using the money to fund not just his relationship with Clarissa, but a lifestyle of gambling and high-risk investments that had eventually collapsed under scrutiny. My phone rang immediately. David, who knew I'd want to talk through whatever emotions this news might bring up. "Are you okay?" he asked without preamble. "I'm shocked," I admitted. I knew he was capable of lying to me, but stealing from clients? That's a level of deception I never imagined. People who lie to the people they love often find it easier to lie to everyone else, David said gently. The boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable behavior get blurred when you're already living a double life. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about Clarissa Crawford, wondering how she'd processed the revelation that the man she'd fallen in love with was not just a cheating husband, but an actual criminal. According to the news reports, she'd been completely exonerated. Investigators had determined she'd been as much a victim of Vincent's deception as anyone else. Rebecca arrived for our session looking tired but determined, carrying the familiar folder that contained evidence of her latest case, a woman whose husband claimed to be working overtime while actually maintaining a secret apartment and a second family across town. "Did you see the news about Vincent?" she asked as we settled into my office. "Just now. It's surreal seeing your ex-husband's mugshot on the morning news. How do you feel about it?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since the story broke. Vindicated, I suppose, and grateful. If he'd been willing to steal from clients, what might he have eventually done to our joint accounts if I hadn't discovered the affair when I did? We spent the session discussing her current case, but my mind kept drifting to the woman I'd been 18 months ago, trusting, naive, completely unaware that the man I'd built my life around was capable of such extensive deception. That woman would have been devastated by this news, would have blamed herself for not seeing the signs, would have wondered what other truths about her life had been lies. But the woman I'd become felt something different. Deep, profound gratitude for the note I'd sent through Marcus that day at Bellacorte. That single act of courage had saved me from years of additional deception, had freed me to build a life based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. That evening, as David and I prepared dinner in my small but cheerful kitchen, I found myself thinking about the message I'd written all those months ago. 14 words that had ended one life and begun another. 14 words that had transformed me from victim to survivor to someone who now helped other women find their own courage to demand truth. "Penny for your thoughts?" David asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was thinking about second chances," I said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "How sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the thing that saves your life." He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that reminded me daily what authentic love actually looked like. "To second chances, then," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances," I agreed, "and to the courage to write our own ending." Outside, the sun was setting over Riverside Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere across town, Vincent was probably preparing for a very different kind of future than any of us had imagined. But here, in this moment, surrounded by honest love and hard-won wisdom, I had never felt more grateful for the note that had changed everything. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when, especially when, it shatters the comfortable lies you've been living with, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, What grows from those shattered pieces turns out to be more beautiful than anything you could have imagined. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.